My name is Shrijay Sheth. I'm co-founder at legalwiz.in, and we are doing a podcast on legal talks with eChai. Legal Talks is going to be a series of multiple episodes, which is going to discuss a lot of different pain points that startups and especially founders of the startups have around how to establish a company, do the due diligences, compliances. It is going to be a few other episodes that would also be airing after this. We are going to discuss today specifically about what are the pain points around the business structure that a startup owner should opt for when they are trying to start a new business. And we have two fantastic founders. First is Mr. Krinal Mehta, and Krinal is leading a company called Growth.digital, and which is into digital marketing. The other person that we have in house is Mr. Sandeep Mudaliar, and Sandeep Mudaliar handles BRIOS consultancy, which is an HR consultancy in Ahmedabad. Thank you for joining us, Krinal and Sandeep bhai, and we are excited to have you over here.
Pleasure joining you, Shrijay.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Great. So today's talk about what kind of business structure should you opt, and we rather wanted to kind of make it a lot more interactive with some real-time feedback from founders of the startups themselves, and that is why we have gathered here to kind of discuss those things. So there are particularly certain points that as a service provider, let's say legalwiz.in as a service provider would look for when somebody comes to us and says that we want to start a business, right? And there are certain aspects which are critically assessed to really tell them what kind of business structure is more importantly suits them, and the reasoning behind that why factor of it, right? So let me very briefly introduce 5 different major business structures that are prevailing in India, which are those structures as more about for-profit businesses, and we'll kind of keep not-for-profit businesses apart for this particular talk. So the first business structure that we have, the simplest one, is called a proprietorship, which is basically an individual kind of starting a business, has the least amount of compliances required, and it is an extension of an individual entering a business in a most natural way. The second is when obviously 2 people come together and form it as a partnership. Now, partnership can be either registered or unregistered, and there are several advantages and disadvantages which we will kind of go over when we detail in the talk. The third, which is rather an interesting structure, is called a limited liability partnership, better known as an LLP. And LLP is a breed between a company, so it kind of carries certain values and advantages of a company structure, and it also kind of brings in a lot of value of being nimble and rather a conventional structure, which is a partnership. So an LLP is kind of, you can think that as a bridge between the two, and which is driven by the Limited Liability Partnership Act of 2008. Then the other 2 structures, and they are kind of similar. One is an OPC, which is a one-person company, and one-person company basically is you still want to get all the benefits of a company, but at the same time you are only by yourself in the business. And a more mainstream version of that is a private limited company, which everybody is kind of aware about, and that is incorporated under the Companies Act 2013 as of today. So these are majorly 5 different structures that a company, one-person company, LLP, partnership, proprietorship, that prevail in the country as of today for a for-profit business running. So I'm going to ask certain questions to each of you, and then we will try to kind of critically assess what is or what could have been a great structure for you to start. Right. So first thing first, let me ask you, Krinal, is how many owners or founders do you have in this company?
So ours at the moment is a private limited structure. So
Fair.
it's known by the name of Squid Research Private Limited,
Okay.
where there are 2 directors. So one is me and the other one is my father.
Fair. So there are
Yes,
2
sir.
people
One.
involved in this
Correct.
business. Absolutely. And how would it go for you, Mr. Mudaliar?
Yeah, so for us also, we basically a limited liability partnership firm.
Great.
And 2 of the co-founders are, the core partners in this LLP. So that's how the current structure works for us.
Fair enough. That is amazing. So it is also interesting to know that we have 2 different structures in the house right now. And I also own a business structure called Hire for Hire Consulting, which is a proprietorship, and a LegalWiz.in Private Limited, which is a private limited
Yeah,
company.
and just to add into that, I have again a parallel different venture, which is again a partnership firm, though.
Fair
So
enough. So I think
probably we have different combinations here.
absolutely. So I think we have all the cards in the deck. So that is amazing to know. Absolutely, that is going to make this conversation a lot more interesting and probably a lot more insightful as well. So just a little bit of context or pointer on this is out of the five different structures that we kind of thought of or discussed about, one person company and proprietorship are the one obviously which would have only one owner of the company, versus the other three have to have at least two owners out there. So definitely that is the first step I think you kind of take in assessing what is a good structure. Is you assess whether you are by yourself or you are with somebody, and that kind of filters out an obvious options for you. The second question is, how risky is your business, or how much of a risk taking ability, or rather an exposure to risk that you want to take as a business. Now when I say as a business, is basically a lot of other structures also extend your business risk to your personal liabilities, right? A lot of times we hear that a business loss kind of carried forward to somebody's personal assets, or the ghar bik gaya wali situation, right? So whether your business is risky enough to take that chance, or is it so risky that you might as well just kind of stay away from that, is another question that I would have. So if somebody can chime in for that.
So in our case, because we are a service provider, so the risk is minimal to that front.
Fair.
So as such, there is no exposure to risk because our payments are due only when the services are availed.
Great.
So we do not have a capital intensive structure where we have machineries, etc. that would carry a lot of risk.
Fair enough.
Right. So
Absolutely. And how
Yeah.
would it go?
Yeah, I think for us also risk is not the major concern, because when we started, what was more important for us was the flexibility to operate, and we were kind of little conscious of getting too much of into formal setups and everything, and not giving away our freedom to operate. That's the reason we said we will go into a structure which is minimum exposure to risk, as well as the flexibility for us to operate the way we want to. So these were the primary focus for us, and like Krinal said, we were also into a service-based business, so there was no direct exposure on the business side of things are concerned.
Correct. And so kind of rounding up that point is, if you go with a conventional setup, which is a partnership firm or a proprietorship firm, right? Your exposure to risk also gets to your personal assets.
True.
Versus if you go with a limited liability partnership or a company structure, may it be a private limited or an OPC structure, your risk is restricted to how much of a capital exposure do you have to the business, and your risk more or less ends over there, except for certain exceptional cases where we have seen the government kind of overruling that situation, and find the directors or the promoters of the company personally liable for any sort of mishaps that had happened in the company, which is an edge case to kind of discuss. If I would talk about myself, primarily why Hire for Hire is built as a proprietorship is because I'm on my own on that. More importantly, I'm a service industry. We provide consulting, and so a lot of risk is already kind of managed within the billing process itself. We never have a lot of exposure to overdue bills and those kind of things. More importantly, as Krinal kind of mentioned, it is not a capital intensive business, right? So I would rather not restrict my risk and take that much of a risk, and enjoy other benefits that proprietorship kind of gives me, which is basically the flexibility in operating and decision making. Compliance is another big thing which we will kind of touch upon after this. So that is why it is kind of structured as a proprietorship. Versus LegalWiz is an e-commerce venture. It has to scale, right? It has to bring investors on board. It has higher risk, kind of as a business model in general. And so that is why it is structured as a private limited company. So how much of a risk or risky your business is also a critical aspect about deciding what model fits you the best. I think the third thing is, do you need to provide ESOP or employee stock option plans or uh, those kind of incentives to your employees, which are ownership based incentives? Is it something that is almost mandatory in your business? Now, a lot of businesses in the West kind of have that as a mandatory feature to for the startups to attract good employees. Is it something that you feel is the need of the hour for your business, Mr. Sandeep Bhai?
Yes, so that's something of an interesting perspective because we work with some of the large matured organizations also in the consulting services. So ESOP is something which is very, very attractive from an employee retention point of view. But honestly, the kind of size and scale of operations that we have, something which is really good but not immediately required for us. So hence we kind of are operating in a structure which is more flexible for us than getting into very formal structure. So yes, ESOP has a great value proposition, but something we would explore in near future to come.
Fair enough. No, that's a great perspective. And Krinal, how would it go about?
So as for us, at the moment, we are not considering giving out ESOPs, but then because we work with a lot of clients from the West, this is something that when we talk about staff augmentation, and then there are resources that might require to go on site at the client's end, this is something that would really help us attract the right kind of talent that you just mentioned. So this is something that we are considering down the road.
Absolutely. So if that is something that is definitely in consideration, private limited is a great structure for you, right? Because by default, private limited company is something which is driven by the share capital, or the ownership is driven by the share capital, which is probably one of the, or unarguably one of the um, easiest way to transfer ownerships across all the different structures, right? So when you have share capital defining your structure, it becomes much easy to transfer your ownership to others, may it be your own employees or may it be somebody who is an outside investor for that matter, right? So that kind of brings me to my next point is, do you anticipate onboarding an outside investor, may it be a venture capital firm, may it be seed investment or an angel investment or an HNI investment at this point of time?
I just wanted to add something with the ESOPs
Sure.
thing, right? So other than attracting the talent for the startup, the other benefit that I see with ESOPs is it provides the employees to have a skin in the game. So and finding right employees and finding good employees that work for you as if it's their own organization, it's always being an ongoing challenge. So I think if they have ESOPs, it makes them feel that this is kind of their own baby, and then you don't have to instruct everything. They start taking that charge, and I think that helps the organization grow at a faster pace.
Absolutely, it is an ownership, sense of ownership,
Sense of
right?
ownership.
So
Yes.
that is definitely true. And then kind of extending the same point is, let's say if you have plans for onboarding investments
Yes.
for your organization, right? Then also private limited becomes a very convenient structure to do so. Not that you cannot do that in LLP as well, because both LLP and private limited by nature limits the liability of every participant in the company, right, or in the organization. So LLP also have limited liability of people who have invested in the company, so as the private limited company. And so those are the only two structures that most likely any outside investors who does not have a lot of control over the operations will entertain.
Okay.
Because otherwise what they would do is they would actually sign up for an unlimited liability if they are a regular partnership or a proprietorship kind of a situation, right? So a company format or an LLP is almost a bare minimum requirement to attract an outside third party investment. It is more preferred when it is in private limited company over an LLP. And the major reason is because an LLP to its core structure is still a partnership, right? So it is governed by an LLP agreement wherein everybody who joins in is a partner, right? Versus a private limited company, they are shareholders and um, there are distinct rights and responsibilities of owners versus the directors, wherein owners being the owners of the shares and the directors being the ones who are actually running the operations of the company. And that is why it becomes so easy for a private limited company to actually keep that distinction alive and attract investors to participate in an ownership or round of funding over an LLP. And obviously, an LLP can at any point of time also be converted into a private limited company as the need be. So those doors are always open.
Right. But what I understand, Shrijay, broadly is, let's say if you're looking from an investor perspective point of view, so even if you're an LLP or a private limited, both these options are actually giving you a roadmap to go ahead and start pitching for investor, or start getting into that conversation. But as this get into a little more matured stage, so as you're saying, is private limited structure is far more organized way of managing the equities, and having a investor coming in and broadly bifurcating your responsibilities.
Absolutely. So yeah, so it is not that investors are going to shy away because it is an LLP, because LLP also provides them limited liability over the investment that they are doing. But when it is a private limited company scenario, it is generally preferred for the reasons that there is a lot of segregation, there is a lot of compliances, there is a lot of better watch of the government, and a lot of other legalities that are taken care in a little better manner than an LLP, so that it becomes a more preferred option for an investor to kind of enter in.
Okay.
But obviously, LLP is also viable option to kind of attract outside investment for sure.
So is it so that private limited overall provides more financial transparency to an investor compared to an LLP from a business perspective?
It absolutely does, because it is governed by the ROC and the Companies Act 2013. So that requires a lot more compliances in general. For example, an LLP might not be audited if it does not have 25 lakh rupees of exposure toward capital, or 40 lakh rupees of exposure towards the sales or the volume. Right? It might not comply, or it might not do an audit and still comply with the act, versus every private limited company has to have an audit. And so those kind of small little things which kind of gives the investor a little better comfort zone, confident, you may say,
more transparency.
Absolutely.
In the whole
That
management.
it kind of smoothens out those processes a little bit.
And I think even the small things like we changed the office, right? So we had to change the address, which required a board resolution to be passed. So that requires, again, the board resolution goes to MCA, I believe.
Correct.
So then again there is a transparency there. So any subtle change happening in the business from a operational perspective, I think would have a better transparency. Or
Right. Those action oriented changes will almost stay similar for an
I
LLP
see.
and a private limited company. There are not a lot of distinctions around it.
Okay.
So those would definitely be taken care of in an LLP as well. It is more about something that is related to an audit, or
Okay.
if you have an ESOP pool, then how those shares or the pools is managed, and those kind of things, which kind of gives them a better clarity of the roadmap and the existing situation of the business.
I think there is one interesting example I would like to quote here. I mean, so when did we actually realize the importance of being an organized and a registered companies? When there was a time when we were kind of bidding for certain big projects, and these were the clients who were global organizations, multinational organizations. So when we actually approached them, the whole bidding process is quite lengthy and stringent, and they have a lot of documentation requirements that they have. And I think the only reason we probably missed that whole deal was because we were not a private limited company, and they actually wanted to work with a organized private limited firm versus an LLP. So I think when you're dealing with some large scale organizations as a service provider, it also brings a lot of credibility if you are a private limited
Yes.
organization versus a partnership firm, proprietor, or an LLP to an extent.
It is an absolute truth, right? I mean, because a lot of records that are for an LLP or a private limited company, more so for a private limited company, are openly available
Publicly
out there,
available,
right? So
right.
they are available on an MCA website. You can actually download the audited statements, or directors report, or auditors report, and those kind of things. So those financial reports are available for the public with the highest transparency to kind of assess. And that is why these business structures are thought to be much more credible compared to a proprietorship, which not at all requires any sort of registration processes, or a partnership which could be registered or unregistered, and
Unregistered,
depending
right.
on what are the advantages and disadvantages of that, people take a call. So if you are a good point is if you are a partnership and not a registered partnership, then you cannot sue your partners as well as outsiders. They could do so with you.
Okay.
If you are a registered partnership, which you can become at any point, so you don't have to be registered to start with. You can do registration later as well. You get an ability to actually challenge somebody in the court for
Okay.
that matter.
And I think when it comes to bad debt recovery, does private limited provide more safer means of recoveries compared to other forms, or
It
is
is
that not the case?
it might and might not be in terms of, let's say, because it is more structured, more governed, you definitely stand a better chance that your books are going to be clear. So there is a lot of credibility, authenticity to it. Your documents are vetted all the time, and so it might give you a better standing, in terms of how you prove your transactional details,
Right.
and those kind of things. So that
Yeah.
is why I say that it might not be and
And I
it
think there is
might
a
be.
very interesting perspective. I mean, to just recent past, while we were debating, LLP versus private limited. So it happened with us actually as a growing organization. So one of the employee working with our team, she came back and she asking us, no, why is it you guys are into an LLP structure? Why can't you move to private limited? So we said, what happened? I mean, why are you asking us as an employee? So this apparently this employee was wanting to apply for a financial loan
Yes.
from a bank.
Yes.
So she went up and applied for a loan. The whole process of documentation went on for a good long week's time, and then after that, bank rejected the application, and the reason being quoted is because you're working in an LLP company, we cannot provide you a personal loan. And
That
had
is
it been a private limited or a limited company, we would have actually happily extended you a loan. And surprisingly, this was the bank wherein we bank ourselves for last 10 years.
wow.
Imagine about it.
That is
So
quite
this happens.
that is quite a
Yeah.
news.
But does that like usually happen, or that's an edge case? Like LLP
I
is
would
not considered.
I would think that to be an edge case. LLP
Okay.
is definitely considered as one of the higher, more credible business organization structure. So it definitely I would definitely park that as an edge
Yeah.
Was
case.
it a nationalized
Uh,
bank by any chance?
No, it
Or
was a private
bank.
private
Okay.
bank only.
Okay.
But maybe I think what I understood is with the recent the crackdown on all these
Mhm.
NPAs, banks have become a little more stringent. Maybe we would one out those
that
case actually.
might be the case. Absolutely. So another question that I would always ask entrepreneurs when I, kind of consult them on what kind of business structure is how likely are you going to exit your business anytime soon or later? And obviously everybody is kind of almost confirmed to die. Uh, but do you envision your business going beyond your identity? So that is, and most of the people would, I'll take an answer uh, for everybody is a yes, right? Is people want to have their business beyond their identities, and this is very important because a private limited company will sustain after, you know uh, if you are not there, or even if you exit for other reason. For example, you sell off the company, right? Versus so if we take a proprietorship structure by itself is an extension of your own identity. And so to an extent that the proprietorship also has the same ITR filing process as an individual. So Shrijay Sheth and Shrijay Sheth as a proprietor, the same thing, and file an ITR or income tax return as an individual with the business income. So that is the proprietorship for you, right? So it is the easiest way of floating the business and managing the business. Versus a private limited company, you have shareholders, and the legal entity of a private limited company is a different individual in the books of law than the owners of the company.
Yes.
And so even though people who own the company are no more, or people who own the company sell it off to somebody else, identity as a company remains as is and has an unlimited, infinite existence in the books of law. So that is one thing which is very important, is how do you want to plan and structure that, I think is very important. Apart from that, a few other minor points. For example, if you want a foreign participation. Then an LLP and a private limited company are very convenient option. Not so an OPC, but private limited company is a better option because for a lot of processes and type of businesses, it is an automatic route of investment versus an LLP might have a little bit of compliance requirements around it. Apart from that, so this is so far what we have discussed is the scale and existence, right? Which is
Right.
every entrepreneur's wish. But at the same times, there are also businesses that are not started envisioning that scale. They are done for other purposes. For example, a mom and pop shop, small scale business where there is not a lot of risk
Right.
involvement of financial or any of that sort, right? So now we'll kind of turn the tables and see why a private limited company and LLP are heavier structures, and a partnership and proprietorship can rather become viable structure, right? So the first thing first is how likely are you going to be keeping up with all the compliance requirements, right? And is it something that you would worry about, or is it something that you don't worry about? Now, legalways.in by itself is formed to with a dream that we want to make people compliant, and a lot of people had that perception about law where they would think that it is very difficult to cope up with, and so we kind of jump in the process and say that okay, now we are going to make it easier for people. But otherwise as well, sometimes it is perceived as a very complex thing. So do you have that experience with
So, very honestly, I did attempt the CA exam, and
Okay.
that was my last encounter with the compliance side of things. Ever since I've been found my calling in computers and try and stay away from things. But then I have a very good friend of mine who is actually a company secretary, as you know, and he runs a compliance organization.
Right.
So I rely on him entirely, and he was the one who told me that it is better to go for a private limited because we were already expecting some investment to come in.
Fair
Where
enough.
I actually went to him to suggest that I would want to go the LLP route because I've been told so,
Okay.
or because of less compliances.
Right.
So, and he was the one that said that you don't have to worry about all the compliances because you have my support and I'm always
Fair.
going to be there. My firm is there. We'll take care of all the compliances,
Agreed.
right? So, and we'll guide you through.
Fair.
So, because I had that support, I took that so-called risk of going the private limited route as my first organization. Otherwise, I would also have preferred like Sandeep by the LLP route.
Fair. So going to a little different end of it, right, is and leaving private limited and LLP kind of a little on side, and why proprietorship or partnerships, which are rather kind of thought of as inferior, kind of business structures, but very interestingly, the statistics still show that it is a lot higher registrations on those categories compared to a private limited or an LLP. And the primary reason of that is the ease of doing business,
Ease of
right?
Or
So
is
if you
or is it the ease of not maintaining the books of accounts?
it not necessarily, right? Because if you are small, right, then obviously you have lesser radar on you. If you dream big and you take those chances, obviously government has to keep those checks and balances in place, and so there is higher compliance. So what I'm trying to make as a point is there is a sweet balance between how heavier you go on the structure, which is private limited or an LLP, and how lean could you go on a structure which is a proprietorship and partnership. And if your business does not need those kind of complexities, you might as well be better off using a proprietorship, right? For example, hire for hire, it is a proprietorship, it does sizable amount of business, so it is actually under the audit radar and it has to be audited and whatnot. But at the same time, it gives me a lot of flexibility in terms of managing the business, right? That I would rather stick with a proprietorship firm. Now when it gets to a stage where I need an outside funding, or where I have to grow very fast, or where I have to take some risk to kind of grow it to the next level and those kind of things, and I want to restrict my personal risk into it, then I would think of shifting that into a private limited or an LLP structure. So it is kind of a risk versus compliance, or how much of a compliance complexities that you take on and what is the benefit that you get out of it, is kind of deciding factor in terms of and also expenses for that matter, right? Is definitely all the compliances come at certain level of expenses, right? So it is it is not always free,
Right.
and so there is a cost associated, cost in terms of time and cost in terms of your efforts as well. And so if you think that that is something that is worth taking on for the betterment of the business, then obviously
Yeah, no, I think
that calls
you're right. I
for.
mean, we went through this whole evolution cycle. In our case, as I said, our first venture was more of a partnership firm. And but the reason why we went into a partnership firm is me and my other co-founder, both of us were into our respective corporate careers, and this entrepreneurship dream was there with us. But then because we were working in respective corporate setups, so we could not be the ones who could initiate it. So that's the first step we took, that we wanted a structure which is kind of flexible, and then slowly gradually we move out of our corporate jobs and join this venture. And that's how we started our first, which was a partnership firm. Pretty much it was initiated with our wives being the formal partners on paper, and we kind of slowly gradually doing all the groundwork and coming into it. But the very next venture that we kind of formally was into was then an LLP, and then we ended up creating the third one again, which is an LLP. But yes, as Srijay rightly said, it's the need and the maturity of the business cycle that you're going from one phase to another phase. Obviously, the next phase for us is to convert one of these LLPs into a private limited firm to be a more matured organization and being more credible institution as such.
So
Fair
I
enough.
think it all boils down to really thinking it through as founders, as entrepreneurs. When we have the idea and we really want to execute it sooner than later, our focus is not so much to think the entire business through for the next 5-10 years. So if an entrepreneur really thinks that this is stage one, okay, stage two I'm looking at getting investment maybe, and stage three maybe I'm looking at foreign investment, for example, then instead of maybe an LLP, they would immediately go for a private limited, because the conversion from an LLP to private limited, I believe, is also
Is a task
is a task.
for sure.
Yeah, right. So and that takes a lot of additional effort, so I might as well. So I think it's all about thinking this through
It's about
instead
the
of
vision,
just
yeah.
taking
Absolutely.
a
So,
real time
how
call.
yeah,
long
so-
your vision is. Yeah.
Correct. You kind of decide your roadmap and see what is the likelihood of having these events happening.
True.
In the long and short run, and that is how you kind of do a cost benefit over it. Also, one more thing and one more point that I would want to kind of mention here in the interest of listeners is the taxation structure, right? So a private limited company structure with the new changes coming from the government and the optimism that is out there for startups registered as private limited company, the corporate taxes are reduced to 25%, right? To certain turnover limits. I believe it is 200 crores as of today. LLP still remains as 30% flat from the first penny that you make in the company. Taxation in proprietorship is very interesting because you file as an individual, so you get an advantage of all the tax slabs that are available
As a
to
salaried
you
individual.
exactly. So not as a salaried, but as a business owner, but it still kind of
Because you're an
has that
individual.
0% tax slab for the first few lakhs, and then it kind of goes to 0 to 10, 5,
Okay.
20, and so on and
So
so
it's the
forth.
same slab which applies to
It is
a normal
exactly the
individual
same
salaried
slab.
individual.
Absolutely, it is exactly the similar.
But then is
The-
it the same disadvantage that applies to the individual, that they cannot show the expenses of the business?
No, so your business, obviously, your business expenses, you can claim those
Claim,
as
right?
expenses,
Okay.
right? So that is why a proprietorship and very particularly why Hire for Hire is a proprietorship is I can claim the expenses at the same time I can also enjoy the tax benefits of the slab. So that is very nimble in its own sense. Partnership is again like LLP, it is a 30%. Corporate tax slab for private limited or an OPC is a 25% until the 200 crore of turnover. So that kind of also set some grounds on where you can actually take advantages of taxation and where you cannot. So overall, if I'm summing this up, and then we'll kind of have a formal sum up, is there are certain things that you definitely want to kind of think of when you decide on a business structure. First one is definitely if you are alone or with somebody. Secondly is how stringent your registration process you want to kind of be in, or
Compliance
what
point of
a
view.
compliance point of view. The third is how likely are you going to raise funds, or how likely are you going to transfer shares in any what means to an employee under any ASOP, or onboard an investor in those kind of things. How do you see your company, or how do you see your business organization still keeping alive after you are not part of the business? So either you sell it off to somebody, or you are not there to take care of the business. Then what happens to that? So the longevity of the business. Very important point is, how do you want to limit your liability, where a creditor cannot claim your personal assets for something that has been done for the business.
The exposure to
The
external
exposure
risk.
to external risk, exactly. And then overall taxation and statutory audit requirements and those kind of things. Do you really feel to kind of take that pain for the benefits that you get from a private limited kind of a structure, versus do you rather avoid those benefits and rather take the benefits of being very flexible in terms of business operation? So I think those are, summing up, those are 6-7 points that I really think everybody should kind of critically assess before they jump onto a conclusion. And more often so is because a lot of times I've seen entrepreneurs who are young in nature, they stay very excited about opening a private limited company. And a fun fact is, a lot of those actually close down before they complete the first year, right? And the compliances are heavy and expensive. If they had stayed as a proprietorship, there could be more appetite to kind of keep it running or whatnot. So
Yeah.
so again, keeping up yourself very excited about registering a private limited company only is kind of almost a fashion in thing. But I think it needs to
No,
then
definitely.
also
And as
be
you rightly said,
assessed.
it is all about being aware about which are the different options you have as you're starting up. So, and as you rightly said, when you are starting up as an entrepreneur, you are too full of energy and you want to get start and go fast. But then there are certain crucial decisions that you often, mistime it or misjudge it, and it actually, impacts your business on an immediate long run also. And that's where these kind of basic knowledge about what structure and what are the model you want to work, the freedom of operations to the exposure to risk and compliance, all that, if you're aware about it as an entrepreneur, as a founder or co-founder, it helps you to take a right decision.
Absolutely. So yeah, with that, I think we sum up today's podcast. And I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. I definitely did.
Yes, it
Absolutely
was
loved
wonderful
it.
interacting with you, Srijay, and I think insights for me and Krinal both, I think we learned a lot.
Definitely, Krinal. Definitely, Sandeep. It was great having you guys over here, and it has been our first but very exciting podcast. So we definitely look forward to do many more in future. Thanks a lot for listening to us. This was Legal Talks with LegalWiz.in and eChai. Thank you, and we'll meet again. Thanks.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Srijay, and thank you, everyone.